Okay, my name is Ms. Hadi. Welcome. I'm going to be using one of my top students' essays to show you how to apply the 2020 rubric to an example, an actual student's example essay written on the 2010 DBQ. Now, I've already done a couple of other videos where I examined another student's essay, Ethan's essay, and I also told you how to approach that essay, the 2010 DBQ, how to look at the documents. So this is under the assumption that you've already looked at the 2010 documents and that you are familiar with the 2020 rubric. If you don't know those things, you should stop the video, go look at the 2020 rubric, and look at the 2010 documents. But let's just jump in, assuming that you've done these things. Okay, so you can see I've put the rubric on the side here for Alicia, and she's going to lose a point for sourcing, but other than that, she's got every other point, which is awesome. She has a fantastic intro, a complex thesis, overall very well written, very well argued. Just got to add that sourcing. One of the recommendations I made in a previous video is that potentially that you source in every paragraph. You need to have at least 2 sourcings be accurate to get that point. But potentially have a whole other paragraph that's just dedicated to sourcing any other documents you hadn't sourced yet, just in case, to get those points. Or you can dedicate that other paragraph to outside evidence. In a perfect world, you would have in every paragraph, other than the introduction and conclusion where your thesis and grouping goes, no grouping in the conclusion, just in the intro, you would have a topic sentence. Then you would start to build your case with evidence from documents. So you'd say, document 1, blah, 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 this shows my thesis this way. Document 2, blah, 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 shows my thesis this way. And then make sure that you add outside evidence in every paragraph and that you have sourcing in every paragraph. And it doesn't hurt to have complex thinking either, where you do other historical thinking skills. Let's begin. Remembering that you will not have time for a very complicated thesis on the AP test. So she's going to do historical context, then she'll have her thesis, and then she'll have grouping sentences, or she should have grouping sentences. But let's take a look. So the Industrial Revolution brought new technologies such as the flying shuttles, steam engines, spinning wheel, and power loom. These technologies allowed people to speed the process of manufacturing as machines made products many times faster than any human worker. Over time, the factories were established using these technologies, particularly in the cotton industry, outcompeting and often replacing manual products. Excellent. It's a really clear explanation of how this is going to affect the cotton industry, which is the topic at hand. Remember, you're supposed to talk about similarities and differences in the mechanization of the cotton industry, and she's really framing it nicely with this is what's going on in history at the time and what's going to be affecting the mechanization of the cotton industry. Now here's her thesis. From the 1880s to the 1930s, both Japan and India experienced a mechanization of the cotton industry that led to a higher production of cotton products. So this is part 1 of her thesis, or part A, let's call it, such as yarn and cloth, and urbanization as a result of migration from rural areas. So here she has similarity 1, a higher production of cotton products, and similarity 2, urbanization. As for working conditions, female workers were continuously favored in textile factories of Japan, whereas in India, they are a minority that decreases over time. This should really be past tense, right? Decrease, or these are just small things, but you've got to stay in the past. Here she's telling me a difference between India and Japan, and it's still related to the mechanization of the cotton industry. Very good. Lastly, the instigator of mechanization in India was a foreign investment, whereas in Japan it was government reforms. Excellent. You guys, this is a complex thesis. It has 4 parts, 2 similarities and 2 differences. I'd love it if she followed up with documents that tell me grouping sentences that tell me which documents are going to prove what part of her thesis. But I know she's going to do that in her topic sentence. She'll tell me this is the first part of my thesis, and it's proved by documents 1 and 2, and then the next topic sentence in the next paragraph will do the same. So it looks like her first topic sentence is going to be about the increase in the production of cotton industry, which can be attributed to mechanization as seen in documents 1 and 2. Very good. Then she'll start to explain her documents. She has to explain them right to get the using point. To get the argue point, she then needs to use them to prove a similarity or a difference. Now that's because this particular essay is about similarities and differences. But if it was a cause and effect essay, she'd have to use it to prove a cause or an effect, a change or a continuity if it was that type of essay. Okay, for example, in document 1, a table presenting yarn and cloth production in India over 4 decades shows that machine-made yarn, cloth and yarn catching up to and exceeding the production of handmade cloth and yarn from 1884 to 1914. This is accurate. This shows that India mechanizes the cotton industry to the point where handmade production isn't as prominent while increasing the overall production of cotton products. Okay, so she understands document 1, but still she needs to use it to prove a similarity or difference. So right away, she should connect it to another document that helps prove that this was similar to or different from Japan. Like India, Japan increased its production of cotton, likely due to mechanization. Document 2 presents the overall yarn production in Japan over the same period. The exponential increase of yarn production in Japan goes at a pace more akin to the increase in machine spun yarn than hand spun yarn of India. Therefore, now she's going to argue. So she got both documents accurately presented them. Then she's going to argue. Therefore, both Japan and India must attribute this overall increase of cotton textile production to mechanization. She connects it back to her thesis. Here's my similarity. Very good. What she could have done in this paragraph that would have made it even better is add more outside evidence that she knows about Japan and India, or add more sourcing. Could these documents have some kind of purpose that affects them, or some author's point of view that affects them, a historical situation that affects them, intended audience that affects them, and always talk about how that affects the document. Now, the next paragraph should be the next part of her thesis. It has to tell me a similarity or difference. It should have grouping, and it should be part of her thesis. Additionally, both Japanese and Indian textile factories depended on the cheap labor of rural migrants, as shown in documents 5 and 9. And if we were to go back and look at her thesis, she mentioned this. She's talking about migration from rural areas, and there it is showing up as her second topic sentence. So make sure that it's, it's nice and cohesive, your essay. All the parts are connected, and that's what I want to see. So now she's going to tell me about those documents. In a perfect world, she would then use them to prove a similarity or difference, and then be sure to add outside evidence and source the documents using PH, I, or A, purpose, historical situation, intended audience, author's point of view. Here we go. Document 5, written by a Japanese industrialist, Surumi Shunusaki, details the origin of cheap workers, arguing that as attached family members of farming communities, low wages are enough to support them. Now that's what he's arguing, but should we trust him because he is an industrialist? As an industrialist, the author stresses the cheap workers are unattached from their families in an attempt to convince his audience that factory workers can live by their meager wages, as cheap labor is the foundation of factories. That's really nice sourcing. She's saying the author's point of view, and this is why he's saying it's enough, when in reality it might not be enough. Their wages might not be enough. And in fact, another document, I think it's the one by the Buddhist priest, says, no, the families actually depended on their wages. I believe that's document 4. So that would be another document to bring in right away if you can, but no worries that she didn't. This shows the factories dependent on the cheap labor of migrant workers from rural areas. Good. Now she's got to link this to what's going on over in India, because remember, it's all about similarities and differences in India. Similarly, document 9, a report from the British Royal Commission of Labour detailing the working conditions and recruitment of workers for the cotton mills, describes that most workers are peasants and agricultural laborers, pointing out that continuously low wages they receive. Careful here, they're not agricultural laborers necessarily. They're from agricultural areas, more rural areas, so just a small thing. This shows that, as in Japan, and I really like how she does this, she's really underscoring, highlighting, emphasizing this is a similarity. It's a nice direct comparison. The Indian textile industry depended on or even exploited the abundance of cheap labor from their rural migrants. Excellent, very well written. Good job. Where's the sourcing, though? Where's the sourcing? I need more sourcing in this paragraph. Actually, she did, sorry. She sourced document. I forgot. I've made a bunch of videos, you guys. Sorry. So document 5, she sourced it. Tried doing document 9. Just keep sourcing, keep adding outside evidence. It's never a bad thing to just remember anyway. Add more sourcing. However, although both Japan and India depended on cheap labor from rustic origins, rural origins, the gender ratios of their factory workforces are opposites. Okay, are different, as shown in document 789. That was another part of her thesis. For example, document 7 compares the percentage of female textile workers in India and Japan over a period of about 10 years, where India had a decreasing minority of female workers and Japan maintained a majority of female workers. So she's accurately explaining the documents, which would give her using points, this one, but not necessarily argues points. She has to connect it back. And she kind of already explained it right before, so it might be enough, but always try to go back to what this is showing. This shows that the Indian cotton industry consisted mostly of male workers, whereas in Japan, female workers provide most of the labor. Excellent. Here's her arguing. That's the difference between using and arguing. Furthermore, document 8, a photo of a cotton mill in Japan, reinforces that the majority of workers in the Japanese cotton industry were women, as 5 out of 8 workers shown are female. Meanwhile, its counterpart, document 9, the photo of a textile mill in India, features only 2 male workers in the assembly line, emphasizing that the Indian cotton industry employs mostly male laborers. Accurate. Correct. She's arguing, she's taking evidence from the documents and using it to prove a point. Very good. Lastly, the mechanization of the cotton industry in India was led by foreign investment, I think she means, whereas in Japan it is the result of government reforms in favor of industrialization. That's her last part of her thesis. It should be followed by, as shown in documents, blah and blah. So make sure you add that. Due to the growing mass popularity of cotton cloth in Britain, which is, again, this is outside evidence, which is more convenient in daily use than wool, and the fact that India was a major producer of raw cotton, more outside evidence, British merchants realized that they could lower their cost of transports by establishing spinning and weaving mills near the stores, for example, in Bombay, India. Again, this is nice. This shows that the foreign investors, mainly British merchants, significantly contributed to and were the cause of mechanization in the Indian cotton industry, as well as the industrialization that would ensue. Okay, so adding a little layer of causation. Unlike India, nice comparison. The Japanese government encouraged the formation of zaibatsu. Okay, very good. Outside evidence, such as the Mitsui combined by selling businesses to private entrepreneurs. Japan became the most industrialized land in Asia by the 20th century, much like Russia industrialized through Count Sergei as railroads and reforms. So here she's connecting to another time and place. What she's angling for is the complexity point. Complexity point, remember, you can get it in a number of ways by having a complex thesis and arguing it well, like Alicia's doing, where you have two similarities and two differences, by comparing to another time or by comparing to another place. These are all really good things to do. Doing lots of sourcing, doing lots of outside evidence, all of that can help. Talking about causation when it's not that kind of essay. If it's a compare-contrast essay, you're adding another layer of historical thinking skills. Okay, therefore, industrialization of the cotton industry in Japan was catalyzed by government efforts of the Meiji reform to really show that this is a difference, repeat the difference here. So say, unlike in India, blah, 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 and then continue. In conclusion, the Indian and Japanese cotton industries were similar, that both relied on underpaid migrant workers from rural areas to feed their growing need for labor. However, they were different in the Japanese textile mills relied more heavily on female workers than the Indian textile mills, and the former mechanized due to deliberate government reforms, whereas the latter did so as an indirect consequence of British merchants seeking to increase their profits. Very nice. What could you add? Well, more sourcing. She missed that sourcing. She got the complexity point, which is really hard to get. Didn't get the sourcing point. You've got to make sure you're sourcing. So again, it would benefit her to have an additional paragraph that's just devoted to sourcing anything she didn't source yet, or just try to remember to do it in at least every paragraph once, so that, if you mess up on one, you still have one to save you on the rubric. I hope this was useful. Thank you, Alicia, so much for sharing your well-written essay with us so that we can, I can share it with my students so that they can learn how to better understand the 2020 rubric and what they need to do to score high on the 2020 AP World History Modern exam. Thank you.